Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the January 15th meeting of the Sustainability and Climate Commission. For the record, I'm Vivian Satterfield, the Chief Sustainability Officer. It's so wonderful to see all of you joining us here today, both in person and virtually as well. For those of you who are joining us today in the room, please help yourself to the delicious dinner that is available to you all. And today we also have plenty of staff from the city, from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability that you'll be hearing from, and they'll be introducing themselves later as well. From here, I'll go ahead and hand it over to Co-Chair Issa.
Thank you, Vivian. Co-chair Issa, I use he, him pronouns. First, I'd like to acknowledge my fellow co-chair, Jose, and my co-facilitator. Next slide. So for a quick meeting agenda overview, we'll be going through meeting instructions and reminders, then public comment, commission updates, another briefing on climate planning and action from 1992 to 2025, a quick 10-minute break, another briefing after that, and then duties for the commissioner feedback form. And so, welcoming back the climate team at the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability today. We're continuing on for the briefings from the last December meeting. And so this is our time to continue our dialogue with staff and ask more questions about climate planning and action in Portland. And we're also going to learn more about Multnomah County carbon emissions and energy trends. Next slide.
Again, I'm Jose Gamari Georgeson, he, male pronouns, co-chair. First, we'll start with the meeting introductions and reminders. Next slide, please. We'll review the notes about this meeting and our working agreements. Next slide.
Yeah, so we'll be reviewing the notes about this meeting and our working agreements. Next slide. So for some quick notes about this meeting, again, this meeting is being recorded on Zoom and will be posted online for transparency. Please make sure that your Zoom name reflects your title. Also, remember that you must raise your hand on Zoom if you have a question and facilitator will call on you. Remember to state your name every time you speak, and for public comment, individuals will be called on by a facilitator. All materials can be found from the meetings event page. And for tech help, make sure to ask Wayne Grabowski. So for working agreements, can I have a commissioner volunteer to read the bold sections aloud? Commissioner Dan.
Commissioner Dan Trapone, T3, speak with clarity and focus. WAIT, why am I talking? Assume good intentions, but attend to impact. Be willing to make mistakes and be forgiving of those who do. Allow for and appreciate disagreement of opinions, ideas, methods, respectfully. Build on other people's ideas. We value participation both in person and virtual.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Next slide.
Okay, back to me again, Jose Gamari Georgeson. Now we're up to public comment, but we don't have any public comments, so we can move on. Next slide, and then next slide. Next agenda item is commission updates. Next slide, please. We do have a few commission updates today. First, I'd like to invite the Chief Sustainability Officer, Vivian Satterfield, to give us her CSO report, and I'll facilitate any questions or discussion.
Thank you, Co-Chair Jose. Thanks everyone for being here. I just have a few short updates for you all. First, I'm excited to announce to save the date for the city's official Earth Day event. It's going to be on April 11th from 12 p.m. to 3 p.m. And we're going to have it at Park Rose Middle School in D1. You will receive the official save the date notice, but you all are the first people to actually get that date. So please circle it on your calendar. I look forward to working with all of you to figure out how we can make this event a success for the public, for the city, and for all of you as well on the commission. Elaine will be following up with information on how to volunteer, how to be involved, although you all are already super volunteers. So I just want to acknowledge that based on your capacity. And I do imagine that the SCC, you will have some deliverables that you want to come out of the retreat that you want to then debut at the event. So there's a lot more to come on that. So circle that date on your calendars, and I look forward to working with you all to make that a success for Earth Day. And then, I would be remiss if I didn't sort of acknowledge that this overarching moment that we're in right now, the impacts that our federal government are having in our communities, the impacts that have happened in our city over the last few weeks. It's been a very tumultuous and challenging time to start 2026. And especially want to send my heart out to the good people in Minneapolis and Twin Cities, in Chicago and LA, and just want to recognize that there's a lot happening right now. And while we don't need to recap all of the tumult that is facing our communities right now, and also here at the city, I want to recognize that each one of us is impacted by these events. And for many of us, there are layers of our personal identities and selves that experience the weight of the current times and discourse. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge that. I also want to assure you all commissioners, because you are a public body and this is a City of Portland building, that this is a safe space. For sure, physically, we have security that's on site, and safety measures here in the building to make sure that the meetings can both be accessible to the public, but also to ensure the safety for all commissioners, staff, and presenters. So I just want to give you that assurance. And so please do let myself or Elaine know if you have any accommodation needs. I recognize that is subject to change as our environment shifts and responds. So please don't think twice about reaching out and sharing what you need. I also want to refer to safety as beyond physical safety. So again, my metaphorical door is always open to you to establish that psychological safety. And I encourage you to use the tools such as the meeting feedback form and the continued invitation to speak directly with our co-chairs to actualize the sort of mutual respect, trust, and safety that we all need to be able to conduct our really important work together. So with that, I'll go ahead and hand it off to Co-Chair Issa.
To me.
Pardon me.
Thank you, Vivian. Coach Jose again. Do we have any questions or any discussion based on any of the CSO? Okay. Seeing none. A little updates on our executive session. We discussed the need for more time for discussion and questions. And this is why, for instance, the climate team is back today, so we could give a little more time for those questions. We also had a bylaws committee meeting yesterday, which was very productive. We've gone through a lot of the bylaws and we've added quite a number of amendments, and that will come before the body, of course, to ratify. We still haven't finished. There was one section we left off, and even after today's conversation, we've had some things come up that might be good putting in. The youth retreat, just as a reminder, that's on Monday, February 23rd from 5 to 8 p.m. in person and required for all commissioners. The youth commissioners are working with Elaine and Interplay to design the retreat. And again, April 11th, circle around your calendar. Everyone better represent, because I will be in San Antonio and I can't go, so it's very sad. Next slide, please. Our next agenda item is returning to the briefing on climate planning and action in Portland. Next slide. This past summer, our assigned readings included the climate action plan from 2015 and our current climate action plan, the climate emergency work plan and its progress reports. It was a lot of reading, and for everyone's reference, those are all linked on the meeting's event page. And I believe Elaine put that in the chat. We do hope you use the time from the last meeting to digest all the information we talked about and are ready to dive back into it. We do have the questions that you all sent documented on that event page as well. The climate policy manager, Andrea Jacob, and the climate program coordinator, Pam Neild from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability are with us again today. And they'll give a brief synopsis of their briefing from last month. And then again, I'll monitor the chat and any raised Zoom hands for any discussion or additional questions. So with that, I will pass it over to them.
Hi, everyone. Andrea Jacob, her climate policy manager for the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, and with Pam and Kyle. And I didn't necessarily think we were going to split out the two. Like, you can ask questions about really anything at any point. But we have the deck up so we can refer, just remind people where we were last time. But I kind of wanted to get a sense from just like a little pulse check in the room. We got into, there was a lot of good discussion last month, but are people coming into the room with specific questions, topic areas, questions about the climate emergency work plan, or just climate in general, or any of the data that you remember from last time? I just kind of want to get a sense of like, how ready are you to dive into discussion, or should we really go through the deck again and kind of prime the pump?
Ask us one so we can raise our hands. If we raise our hands, it'll answer. You gave us either or.
Tell me whatever you want to tell me. Okay, so I'm not seeing a lot of questions coming right off the bat. Okay, so let's run through a little bit more of the presentation. Do I control no, you are. Okay, maybe we'll run through the key takeaways. There we go. So some of the messages we gave to you all last time were that because we have so many years of data and we have backward looking and we have forward looking modeling, the what of climate action isn't in terms of decarbonization. Now there's a lot on the resilience side and preparation side that I'm not really talking about at this moment. I'm talking about taking the carbon away. That's largely a known solution set. I mean, there's lots of things you can do, but the general strategies around, decarbonizing buildings, transportation, the electric grid, industry, like those are pretty well known. I think the conversation is really around what order do we do those things in, who pays for them, who benefits, who's burdened. So that's really about funding and political will. We have a bias, I think, on our team, having been through 3 to 4 different climate action plans over our careers. We've seen them be a couple hundred pages long, or a couple hundred actions, many pages long, everything under the sun in them, and those have a place. We have over the CEW, the Climate Emergency Work Plan, we shortened it considerably. We thought that it made more sense instead of, kind of having a kitchen sink approach to be more targeted and more focused. For our audience at that time was really specifically city council, and we wanted them to understand the levers and the sphere of control that they had specifically, because there's lots of things that are out of our control as the city of Portland. We don't have jurisdiction over the electric utilities. We don't have jurisdiction over the building codes. Those are 2 big levers that other cities have. We do not. But there are things that the city can do. So we were trying to show where the city had direct control or where they had a significant amount of influence and leverage that they should use. But we're kind of advocating, and it's obviously, the process and how you all want to handle it is up to you. I think our staff kind of suggestion would be to hone in that less is more. That's what that bullet point means. It's that there's at this point probably more value to really targeting a few high impact actions rather than, and especially as you're maybe following the city's budget situation, we are in a very constrained environment, and a lot of unfunded mandates. We've been in that situation for a long time, and now the funding situation is even worse than I can really remember. ever having been in this situation. So it's just probably better to target and aggregate resources to a few things. So that's what less is more is. We hit this theme over and over again that, you know, the electricity is our largest source of emissions, and we don't control the electric grid, but we are highly interdependent. Our ability to meet our climate goals is very connected to whether the utilities, and when I say the utilities, I'm talking about Portland General Electric and Pacific Power. Those are the two electric utilities that serve Portland. They are under mandate from the state to decarbonize by a certain date and time. And if they don't do that, we will not be able to, Portland will not be able to meet its own goals. So that relationship is really important. And you can think about it like this, you know, if we're looking to switch off of fossil fuels, which is really what decarbonization is mostly about, and that means we're replacing natural gas appliances and we're replacing, you know, gasoline-driven cars, and that those things are going to become electric, then you need the electric grid that is supplying those end uses. You need that to be clean and renewable. So it's a very interdependent relationship that we have with the utilities, and we just wanted to highlight that. I already sort of spoke to this, prioritize where the city has authority. That kind of ties to the less is more. And then, you know, this is really more that this last bullet is more like kind of a political lens, just that as we're seeing, you know, kind of what's dominating the decision maker agendas and where they're really focusing is a lot on housing and economic development. And I feel like all of us up here advocating for climate action and change we're just not having a lot of success breaking through because those other pressing issues are so much like climate change is a slow moving threat coming to us, but housing and the economic situation are like right in front of our nose. And we know that decision makers deal with what is right in front of their nose. So there is a nexus here between, you know, climate, housing, and economic development. And we just need to continue to tease those out and maybe use different framing just to continue to be creative around how we're presenting the climate work. If we're not getting traction with just a climate first, climate only kind of message. So I'm going to stop there for a second to see if there's any questions about that.
Commissioner Gregg?
Commissioner Greg Rutzinas, District 2. Did I hear you right that I understand that obviously utilities and other jurisdictions we can't directly influence, we can kind of work with? You mentioned, I thought you said building codes we can't control either in the city level. Can you elaborate on that, or is that not what you said? Or?
That is what I said. So the state controls building codes. We implement building codes. And so there's a max and we can't go whatever the max is, and there's a min, however it's constructed, we can't really go below those. There are ways to get around that, and we have been creatively seeking all the ways to get around that. But just to be clear, that is a lot of the things that we might want to do are likely preempted by the state.
Could I follow up?
Yeah.
Commissioner Greg Rutzinas, District 2. How much can zoning be a tool in sort of implementing some of these changes, and how is that being used?
I think that's a great question. So we have been very creative with our zoning code, and I might point to Ingrid. Ingrid has a couple of great examples of how we've found the nexus with the zoning code and some transportation decarbonization efforts. Do you want to just speak to that for a second?
Zoning has been extremely important in our climate work here at City of Portland. Much of it has to do with creating. Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know if you can hear me. Ingrid Fish, Bureau of Planning, Sustainability, Climate Team staff. What I said was that the zoning code has been an extremely important tool for the City of Portland. Most of the work has been focused around density, creating connected communities, and making it easier for people to get to where they to get their services met and live closer to where they need to go. So that's been a really big piece. And then also just kind of development and making sure that there is transportation oriented development. And so that's kind of key, right? Like before we need less electric vehicles, we need less of this electricity intense technology if people can actually just get to where they need to go by walking and biking and taking public transit. So definitely zoning is an important piece, and we continue to do that work. And I can go into more detail if you want to chat
Thank you.
afterwards.
Thank you. I put myself in the queue for a question, but I see Commissioner Angus has a question, so I'll let him go first.
Yeah, please, Jose, go ahead. I can wait.
There's a lot of conversation about funding, political will, and if you pay attention to city council meetings, there's a lot of conversation about PSEF and the climate investment plan. How closely do you all work together? I see a lot about the this climate plan, but I don't hear about how it plays with the climate investment plan or the funds that we have available to make things happen.
Yeah, I'll address that. So I think as we talked a little bit about last time, we showed where all of the different sectors of the economy where carbon comes from. So buildings and transportation and industry and things like that. And if you look at the climate emergency work plan, everything that has a star next to it is an action that falls under one of those categories, but is funded by PSEF. So PSEF's funding categories map directly to the same analysis that we have from our inventory analysis and our pathways analysis. So again, it's when the PSEF folks wrote their code, they already knew that like we had to focus on clean energy and transforming buildings. The original PSEF code didn't speak to transportation, and there were some reasons for that. And then as things evolved, transportation got added in. Industry got added into PSEF. So the categories that PSEF funds map exactly to the same sector-based analysis that Kyle showed last time. So we sit next to each other. We talk a lot in terms of the PSEF and climate teams. But we do policy stuff, and they are an investment program, right? So we functionally do very different things, but our work comes out of the same shared analysis. I think that's like the best way I can say it right now.
Yeah, that's good to hear. I guess I just mainly asked because I hear over and over that one of the key ways to improve everything is walking, biking, and more public transportation. And I just heard it again. But I haven't seen them really invest in public transportation as much as they do into electric vehicles, for instance. When we're hearing less electric vehicles, more public transportation would be even better.
I think there's active debate about how you split that baby. I think our pathways analysis, if Kyle gets a chance to show it, shows that there is not a single action. Like we actually have to do all of those things. And again, it's the question of who's going to pay in what order we're going to do them, but it's not really optional for us to have EVs, and it's not optional for us to walk, bike, and take transit. Like we have to do all of those things. So I don't necessarily love to pit those things against each other, but Ingrid wants to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say there's kind of a history. Transportation projects are extremely expensive. And I think the intent of the PSEF fund originally was not to have it all go into one place and be sucked into transportation, which could easily happen. And then the fund ended up having more resources than originally thought. And that's when it opened up to transportation decarb projects. And so there are some projects that are funded, but it's not meant to take the place of city budget and what city budget should cover. It's really supposed to be supplementary funding source. And so they are doing, although as we know, transportation funding is under attack right now and it's underfunded. But there are definitely transportation decarb projects that are being invested in, but in terms of like road paving, and it has to have like a clear decarb connection to it. And so many of the projects are e-bike rebate program, bike lanes is expensive, but buffers to the bike lane might be part of that. So it's a kind of a gray line as to kind of what makes sense for PSEF versus from other funds. For
And I guess
transportation.
I just would add to that, we do have a hierarchy, right? We do prefer, like PBOT would say, like reducing vehicle miles traveled, getting people out of their cars is their highest priority. And safety and congestion, right? They're solving for multiple things. We, on the climate team, look at it as, even if PBOT is absolutely wildly successful in achieving that mode shift and getting everyone on transit or out of their cars, that still leaves a lot of emissions on the table, right? We still have to address the fuel that is going into the cars that people are still going to be driving, the fleets that are still going around, the freight and all of that. So there is a transportation hierarchy that in Portland that definitely prefers alternative modes and reducing vehicle miles traveled and getting people out of cars. We look at it, I think, a little bit more broadly than PBOT and recognizing, I think, a little bit more, I don't know if I should say pragmatically, but we know that there's still going to be a lot of cars on the road that we need to deal with, and that not everyone can do all the biking and walking all the time. So we do need solutions for the cars and for the buses and the fleets and all of that. So that's a lot where the policy stuff comes in, where we have done the renewable fuel standard to address diesel emissions in the heavier and medium duty vehicles. And Ingrid works a lot on freight with PBOT. That's definitely been identified as a pretty high priority. So I know that it's going to dissatisfy people that I'm saying we have to do everything. We do have to do everything. There is a sequencing to some of this, and we can get into that a little bit more. But the answer is though, like if there's not really a silver bullet, and that's kind of hard. There's just like silver buckshot.
Yeah, thank you. The context is very helpful, especially some of the reasons why we haven't entered that in the past. For obvious reasons, it was at the Climate Commission committee meeting today. The transportation piece has been talked about, and there's no intention to pit one against the other. I do understand that we need to do all the pieces. So the context does help as to why we don't have more PSEP transportation projects, because I've been asked that question myself. So thank you. I'll go back to Commissioner Angus now for his question.
Hi, Kai, you just promoted me, Jose, to co-chair. Thanks. But I will defer to you and Isa. This is Commissioner Duncan and Andrea. I have to express some dismay at the notion that that the city and this commission should deprioritize things like building codes, things like electrification, things like electric vehicles, because the primary responsibilities and authorities and resources are with the state, and in some cases with the federal government. I have to tell you that when I worked, on the state side of all of this, we would frequently say, God, if only we could get the city of Portland to move on this, the rest of the state would move forward. And in any event, even if they move slowly, city of Portland is the big prize here. If we can move the city of Portland, we can move the needle on greenhouse gas emissions. So I have to ask specifically, I assume you are not ruling out a device that the city of Portland has used frequently in the past, which is to go to the state and seek a modification in the building code that would only apply, say, to cities of 200,000 people and more, and that the city could seek such a building code, in effect, a building code exemption for a city as large as Portland to move building code issues forward. And I realize you can't do that with everything because the building community would go crazy if you tried to do that. But I think that still is a selected target that we can reserve as a city and as a commission. And I would be interested in your reaction to that assertion. Equally, I think that we can, since the city of Portland is and the people in Portland are by far the largest customers of both Pacific Core and PGE in the state of Oregon. There certainly is a substantial amount of not regulatory direction, but a substantial amount of leverage. And that's particularly true given the focus within utilities, including PGE, on the development of a virtual power plant that develops load center energy and capacity resources, and there's some real benefits to the utilities in doing that, as well as benefits to the city of Portland. So I think there's leverage in both of those places, but I'm interested in your reaction.
Yeah, I appreciate all of that, Commissioner Angus. I definitely did not mean to imply that we have just rolled over and we don't try. I wanted to just be clear about where the regulatory authority was. That doesn't mean that we just let them do what they want. I think that we are very active with commenting and in different dockets. We use the mayor's bully pulpit power, Vivian's bully pulpit power whenever we can. On building codes, I just wanted to say that whenever we develop policy, and my colleague Vin Mason, I believe, is on the line, and he can speak to this. We are very mindful of how to craft it in a way that won't trigger preemption, right? So the building performance standards policy that we've been working on for 6 years, which we have handed over to City Council as a code package, specifically looks to regulate carbon in existing buildings, not energy, right? Because energy is the subject of building codes, but it is silent on carbon. So that's an example of a creative workaround. Vin, do you want to speak to why we haven't done the local code amendment pathway to the building codes? That has certainly been in our arsenal, but we've never exercised it. And there's good, solid history as to why. But I don't want to put you on the spot if you're not wanting to take that. I can field it. But if you're there, come off mute.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak
No.
to that. Hi, everyone.
Hey,
Vin
Andrea,
Mason.
so I probably wouldn't have asked. Go ahead. Go ahead, Mason.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
No, please. I want you guys to finish up here.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you, Andrea. And hello, commissioners. I'm Vin Mason with the Portland Bureau of Planning and Sustainability, he, him pronouns, and I'm on Andrea's climate team. I'm the building decarbonization policy lead, and I've been with the city since 2007. So there is a long sordid history with local code amendments with the Building Codes Division and the city of Portland, as well as other jurisdictions in the city around areas that include state preemption. Energy is one of those areas of building codes where the city of Portland is preempted. Another one is sprinklers for buildings. And there was a local code amendment that the city sought over a decade ago for it's a legal option to seek a local code amendment. That's similar to the modification that you mentioned, Commissioner Angus. And that was not successful. It was a long lawsuit over the number of sprinkler heads in a line. And the temperament of the Building Codes Division that has the building codes for the state has changed though since then. So I think the pathway for a local code amendment is probably a less risky pathway for being successful and for a local code amendment in the future. However, there is still energy code preemption, and one thing I will note is that Andrea mentioned that there are other ways that we can regulate that relate to climate. For instance, greenhouse gases are not regulated by the current building codes. So that is an area that we can regulate. Another is nitrogen oxides, air pollutants, that can have the same outcome as electrification. But there is a whole layer of federal preemption as well. There's a bit of a dance around that. And so there's some legal risk that comes up with the federal preemption. So there are pathways. They are most likely legally challenging pathways.
Great. Okay, Andrea and Mason, thank you very much. I wouldn't have asked the question if I wasn't pretty sure what the answer was. And I think it is important to for my fellow commissioners also to understand, particularly in a time in which the city of Portland's budget hole, is deep and getting deeper, that that we will have limited leverage, if our leverage relies on pumping money, in the direction of greenhouse gas reduction. So we do have to look at regulatory tools as well, and we have to look at the ability to persuade or leverage the electric utilities to commit some of their resources to the electrification and therefore emissions reduction strategies of the city. That's just an unpleasant fact of life when you don't have a lot of extra money. So I want to make sure that regulatory tools and leverage with both the state and the electric utilities remain on the table for myself and all of my fellow commissioners, as we look at how we can take your advice and focus in on some certain areas and try to move the needle in those areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Stephanie?
Commissioner Stephanie Kaza, she, her, District 3. 3 topics, you can take them in any order, but what I first am most interested in, being a fan of Bill McKibben, is plug-in solar, and wanting to know if we could somehow just work with the making the permitting for that extremely simple in the city so that people can just buy this. And he is really pushing it as emergency preparedness. It's a different angle, and I think it'll be popular that way. So that is, are there possibilities that we can work with there? The second one is, do you have goals in the office for working with the short session of things to support bills, legislature that will support these climate goals? And then the third, probably don't have much to say, but as a committed cyclist, pedestrian, the biggest disincentives I never hear people talk about are theft and safety. So you don't park your bike hardly anywhere safely in the city and just leave it. That's been my experience. I wouldn't do it unless you have like a 10-pound lock. And safety too, I would take public transit here at night, but I'm really not sure about, I love taking it. So it's just a personal experience, but you can skip that completely. It's just that these intersections of, say, underground economies among houseless populations and others may intersect with transportation challenges and goals. But mostly solar plug-in. That's my main. Come back to that.
I will address that. Yeah, so my team is very bullish on plug-in solar, on balcony solar. Hearing a lot about it. It's not my passion project at the moment, but it is for my team. So we are in active conversations about that. As far as short session law, any session, we have a whole legislative team at the Bureau that we prepare for every session. We work with our government relations staff here at the city, our state lobbyists and federal lobbyists, to help set the legislative agenda. Climate is always a plank in the city's legislative agenda. And then what the priorities are for each session really depends. For this short session in particular, we're not expecting a lot of climate, there will definitely be some bills, but there will be, less focus on that, I think, than in some of the longer sessions. But we are in contact with we have stakeholders and partners that are, like Oregon Environmental Coalition and Climate Solutions and community-based organizations to sort of figure out what our priorities are based on each session. So we do take an active role in that. And then, of course, our state lobbyists are filtering that through many of the other city legislative priorities and balancing that. But our job is to elevate those and bring those forward, and we do every session.
Let me just add parenthetically that if we are aware of what those goals are in a kind of bullet pointed list, as your commissioners on this commission, we should now be able to be mouthpieces for the office. But without knowing, like, here are the bill numbers, or here are the sponsors, or here are the people we'd like you to talk to. So
when we get to that point, we can definitely engage.
It's around the corner,
Yeah,
right?
it sure is.
Thank you. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Thank you. Just a reminder, when we're doing testimony like that, unless we've decided as a body of how we stand on something, you have to speak on behalf of yourself and not the body. Just as a reminder. Sky?
Thanks. Alternate Sky Dancy, he, him pronouns, District 4. I'd like to come back to something you said earlier about having trouble getting the attention units from decision makers for such a long burning emergency. Can you talk a little bit about how you've partnered with others? We have such an intersectionality between the climate crisis and houselessness or health equity and so I guess I find, what did you say? You can't have a climate first, climate only approach. Can you talk about how you've partnered with others to get that climate intersectionality surfaced?
I didn't say you couldn't, we've just found it challenging. But I'm going to ask Vivian if you want to speak to this, since this has been your world for the last 3 years as well.
Vivian Satterfield, your CSO. So I think this, honestly, the change in the form of government is giving us a better opportunity than ever. We've got not just district representation for the first time, but such a diverse cross-section of folks who are coming very clearly with a lens and with a community that they're trying to support. And so I think that this is actually the best opportunity that we've had in the last decade to truly have a discussion with decision makers that is intersectional. Because of course, anytime that your first responders are responding to a safety issue in the middle of a heat dome, that's a climate response that needs to happen on top of all the other layered responses. And so I think that for the first time, we're best positioned than ever before to be able to have that intersectional conversation. That being said, I really encourage you all to also track, as I do closely, the work of the Climate Resilience and Land Use Committee as different topics are being explored. And because there's so much here that we can do is to try to figure out. And I think the role of the staff and the direction of this office is to help lift up those impactful points and to help offer the prioritization. Because we do know what we need to do, and we can offer a climate lens to everything that is being debated across the street.
I wanted to add like a specific example. So, and I'm going to go back to our building performance standard, or what we call climate and health standards for existing buildings. We worked at length with community members to prioritize the values and the needs of frontline communities. And so the framing on that was really not so much about climate, but it's about health and affordability and energy equity and anti-displacement and resilience and things like that, because those are, not only do those resonate more with decision makers, they actually resonate more with regular people. Climate doesn't test well. Carbon doesn't, it's just not a thing. We care about it. And certainly, at the BPS climate team, we care about it a lot, but we don't feel that coming from the community. Like when I say community, I mean really broad community. It feels like people, when you look at community-based plans, their language is very different than the language we use. So some of this is really more about framing and kind of how you reach people in communications, because putting that climate message or that carbon reduction stuff first, it really, I've been doing this for 20 years. I haven't seen it land really, except with the very devoted core. But when you broaden it to talk about health and you broaden it to talk about affordability and things that are more like kitchen table issues for people, that does get people more engaged. That's just my observation. Looks like Ingrid wants to jump in
Yeah,
here.
just another example is on the transportation side. We are finding a lot of accidents and deaths that are related to the houseless population and vehicles, right? And so if we're paring down, we're making our roads safer, we're making it easier to bike and have smaller vehicles rather than big freight for the last mile, it actually helps with the safety of our houseless population. So there's tons of different, that's just one example, but there's a lot of intersectional pieces to the climate crisis and these other crises that we're talking about.
Because I don't have the ability to raise my hand currently on Zoom. This is your CSO, Vivian, speaking. I just wanted to also lift up that there's been plenty of community plans that have been oriented around climate justice. So I want to lift up some of the comments that Commissioner Dan is putting in there about the climate justice plan that Multnomah County's been coordinating, but also to speak to the many community-based organizations, NEA, Verde, Coalition of Communities of Color, that were some of the first organizations to put forward a climate justice plan in order to be responsive to what may have felt like an increasing divide between what was happening on climate from a technical level and what community was experiencing. So I think that we're at such a fortunate time, especially looking around this table, to see that now is the time that we can braid this together, that it's not separate. We have the knowledge. We know what we need to do. We have communities' lived experience, voices, and support. We have a new form of government that is ready and hungry to go. And so this truly is, I think, an opportunity for us to create a next climate action plan that is responsive and changes the material conditions of people's lives, how they live it in a rapidly changing climate in Portland.
Thank you. Commissioner Vivek?
Hi, Commissioner Vivek, District 2, he, him. I guess I'm just trying to situate the myriad different possible directions this can go and trying to not bring too critical of a perspective, but to try to figure out like what would be helpful to the Bureau from a commission point of view. Like how can we be of service to give you feedback? And because every one of these topics I'm hearing, there is like a deep well of knowledge that you all carry that is in the field. And I'm a little bit like dizzy. I'm a little bit dizzied by the complexity and layering of information. And I get that we're in charge of helping develop a climate action plan eventually, and this information will be helpful in terms of the kinds of materials that you're offering. Some of it is so incredibly technical, and it is absolutely going to fly over my head, let alone others' heads, I imagine. And I'm just trying to kind of ground us in like, what is it that's going to allow you to make the kind of strides and advances in the work that you're doing that a commission can be supportive of? And at the same time, how can the commissioners be kind of getting these key takeaways so that we can be leveraging what all the deep and broad work that you've already done into the development of this climate action plan? So I'm just trying to like figure out where best to fit in this conversation with the charge in front of us right now. I hope that made sense.
It sure does. Vivian Satterfield, your CSO, Commissioner Vivek, thank you. And I want to acknowledge that's a really real feeling, and I'm seeing a lot of head nodding here. I want to emphasize the Sustainability and Climate Commission. All of you are bringing your own realm of expertise to this table. So please don't feel like you need to earn your PhD in what the Bureau of Planning Sustainability collectively, the great knowledge and technical expertise that they have. We're going to be doing this work together. And I want to preview for you that the city auditor actually is coming out with a climate justice audit. It's a performance audit, and it's retroactive. It's looking at the past 5 years of climate justice work, and they'll be offering some recommendations that will be published likely in February or March of this year. And so I don't want to get out ahead of some of those recommendations, but I will preview that a lot of it has to do with how this body is going to offer some prioritization for the work ahead. Because yes, there is so much to do on climate. We have so much that we could do, but leveraging the expertise that you have, doing community engagement, using you all as the point to help do further community engagement, to offer that prioritization of those actions, I think is one of the most valuable contributions that will be made in development of our next climate action plan, alongside and paired with all of the great expertise that exists at the city. The Bureau of Planning Sustainability is such a key partner in this, but we're also leveraging the expertise of the water, of One Water, right? Of Portland Parks and Recreation, all of those climate practitioners within the city that are embedded. There's so many of them, will allow us to get us where we need to go. Andrea, Pam, Kyle, is there anything else you'd like to add to that?
I think one way that we've been sort of thinking internally about how to approach the next climate action plan with all y'all in the mix. One way that I see it, at least initially, is that this body can help as like kind of steering, right? Like it's there's going to be key decisions that will bring to you all that you can help without being any kind of technical expert. Can be like, you know, here's a fork in the road. Like, should we go this way or this way? You know, putting options in front of you all, and then you guys discuss it and give us direction. In past climate action plans, we've used, you know, bodies like this as kind of the steering, and then as we get into more of the technical details, there can be technical advisory groups. Like, this is just one approach. That doesn't have to go that way, but I just want to alleviate any concern that you're, you know, as Vivian did, that we'll keep it at a level where, you know, it makes sense, and then let the real nitty gritty be handled by nitty gritty people.
Thank you. We have a scheduled break in a few minutes. There's 4 questions on the queue. I'm gonna get through as much as we can and then we'll go to break, but we might not get through all of these before the break, just a heads up. Commissioner Seuss?
Sue's Ware, Commissioner Sue's Ware, she, her, District 4. Something I was wondering about, just, I don't know, I work in environmental communication. So you're talking about sort of this framework of, you know, maybe decarbonization or like carbon sequestration. The language around decarbonizing doesn't always perform well with folks in the day-to-day. And so I'm wondering, you know, this conversation around this, does this influence more so how you imagine us, you know, steering decisions or trying to move political will where we can? Or does this also influence, you know, the language of the next climate plan? Is that something where, like, should we be thinking about our you know, putting together like a livable future plan, or more so, does it change the kind of language that we use in that kind of document? Or are you more so sort of pointing to tying all these issues together from just how we are going to get, you know, our focused goals accomplished?
I mean, I really do think that's for you all to decide and grapple with. Like, that could be, you know, framing is a really good conversation for you to have. I don't want to presume to tell you all how you want to, you know, direct this next thing. I guess what I'm just bringing to it is our observation that, and I appreciate the folks that are, there are communities that, community plans that are climate justice forward. But if I look at the, you know, the county's climate justice plan, it doesn't really talk about carbon that much. It talks about universal goals. It talks about things that are clean air, clean water, you know, access to nature, access to affordable options, things like that. So to me, the climate justice plan that the county did is actually a really great example of framing things in community terms. So I think that's something for you all to really grapple with. Like, the climate emergency work plan is really like a strongly decarbonization kind of wonky focused document. And that was intentional, but I don't know that the next one, what you guys are going to work on, needs to be that. I think it needs to be grounded in science and evidence and data, which Kyle is going to talk about more, and you'll all get more, you know, access to that. But how we talk about it, how we frame it, wide open.
Thank you. Commissioner Dana?
Commissioner Dana Visi, she, her, District 4. First, I want to say thank you so much for all this work, because I know as a fellow climate practitioner, it's hard, it's heavy, it's takes true commitment and dedication, and I know how hard you all work and all the tremendous work you've done. When I was Googling today, just things like, you know, solar permits for rooftop solar, Portland comes up as one of the leaders, you know, as a city in terms of speed of applications, because I wasn't sure. And when I look at like low carbon concrete, leader is Portland. So there's lots of different examples around just what Portland is doing. I guess my question is, I know we all know what the what is. I think a lot of it comes down to the how and to the implementation. And that's, I think, going to be something that we'll hopefully get to really dig into. And I just wanted to ask you, from your experience, just what you've learned through implementation, like where are the pinch points, where has there been the biggest success? I know we're probably going to need to get into phasing and sequence because we can't do everything. There's not enough money to do all the pathways all at once. I would imagine. I don't think that there's a budget for that. It'd be helpful to know which actions have the biggest impact that also have the best co-benefits that will be beneficial to talk about to community members, because I think that's where there's big selling points. So I'd love to just dig into implementation. I know it's a lot there, but kind of what have you learned? And if you don't have leadership support and you don't have political will, great projects don't go anywhere. So I'm curious what you think too, just where is the temperature of the current council, the mayor, on kind of really the implementation piece of this?
Really good question, very loaded, hard for me to answer in a public setting. I would say that one of the lenses on the climate emergency work plan already kind of takes a prioritization approach. Yes, there are 46.7 actions in it. There's only 23 decarbonization actions, and there is sort of an implied priority there. So we started with action E1, which is decarbonize the grid, work with the utilities to decarbonize the grid. And to Commissioner Angus in particular, we were doing that through, we were hoping to get a community-wide tariff, so that basically the default for any Portlander, when you flick on the lights, that was just going to be 100% clean electricity. And we would do that through a tariff mechanism that was specific to the city of Portland. And that would have gotten us a pretty long way down the road without the city needing to necessarily implement, just a partnership with the utility or utilities. We were really only in active conversations with Portland General Electric, and that really didn't go anywhere. But for the time being, let's assume we prioritize that as number one. And then buildings came right after that, because buildings are a large part of the emissions puzzle. And we do, despite the preemption challenges, we do have some creative ways to address that. And we spent an enormous amount of implementation staff time. And when I say implementation, it was really around policy development to get to the implementation, right? First you start with the policy, then you get that passed, then it becomes a program, then you do program development for a year, and then you implement it. And Pam can talk about how we've gone about implementing the renewable fuel standard. Both Kyle and Pam can, and I'll give Pam a chance to talk to that, because that's the real blood, sweat, and tears story about implementation. So in terms of prioritization, the climate emergency work plan kind of looked at the analysis and said, we think these are the biggest bang for the buck type actions. What historically happens is, in the few wins that we have had in my career, where we have gotten a policy passed and then we go into program development and implementation, it is never funded. We never put a fiscal on it a fiscal request on it, because in every council I've ever been part of or worked with, that would have been just game over right there if I'm asking for money as well as the policy. So we just try to do the politics, get the policy passed, and then we scramble internally to execute and implement with existing resources. And that ends up spreading everybody real thin. And I think that's partly informing why we're going with this less is more kind of idea. But do you want to talk a little bit about the lived experience of implementing renewable fuel standard with zero resources? I don't know.
Yeah, so Pam Neal, she, her, Bureau of Planning and Sustainability Climate Team. And unfunded mandate was what popped to mind as well. I am conscious of time, so I'll be brief. But if you imagine yourself working in the private sector and you need, documentation, or you need communications assistance, or you need administrative support, or maybe you're not an expert in data analysis, or all the things. When we pass policy at the city, you get handed a policy that needs expertise in all those areas, but you just, in the case of the policy renewable fuel standard, we've got Kyle and Pam, and neither one of us even work full-time implementing the program. So unfunded mandate, I guess I just come back to that. And if I'm sure the question was recorded, is that right, Elaine? I think I would like to just do a deeper dive on that in writing, just to give more examples. Thank you for asking.
Thank you. We have our scheduled break right now. There's 2 questions left. Are you guys okay to ask them after we get back from break? Yes?
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect, great. So we will be back at 7:15 in 10 minutes. See you all then.
And then you can. There's been. Yeah.
I'm ready now.
Yeah.
Hey, everyone, we're coming back together now.
About that whole.
Then you're. So.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Okay, I believe we had a few questions left over from the last briefing. If we could, if you guys are able to go over them again? I believe Commissioner Dan and Commissioner Nora had questions.
I thought Commissioner Dan was first. Thank you. My mistake. One of you. This is Commissioner Nora. Thank you for the time. I wanted to build off Commissioner Vivek's really thoughtful question around how can we be most helpful to you all as city staff. And I know we're all very eager to dig into and roll up our sleeves on the next climate action plan. And I've really appreciated all of the materials that city staff has put so much time and effort to over the years, and was great to see the most recent climate emergency work plan update progress report, and have you walk through, Andrea, what prioritization already exists within those past documents. And so I guess I have a two-part question. First, in terms of what you all might be able to share in terms of latest thinking around anticipated timeline for the development and finalization of the next climate action plan, and just anticipating that the answer to that won't be like next month, right? And we know we have 4 years to reduce to reduce our emissions 24%. We're down the other side of what's long been understood as the most decisive decade for climate action. So if the plan won't be ready next month or even, the first half of this year, I'm just curious how we can support with that prioritization process and really lean into this less is more, right? Try to coalesce as much as possible as a commission in terms of here's some near-term actions that have long been identified as, major levers that, connect to housing and economic development, that we could start at least socializing with our city council members or just generally in terms of possible ideas for near-term policy progress.
Sure. For the record, Vivian Satterfield, Chief Sustainability Officer. Commissioner Nora, I love your optimism in thinking that we would be having a climate action plan next month. So I've been thinking about and working alongside city staff on working on a scratch proposal that will be ready to share with the commission, hopefully not next month, but possibly the month after, in preparation for a more public kickoff of the climate action planning process to engage the public at that Earth Day event as well. And so my commitment to you is that I'm going to treat this with the urgency that it deserves, and also recognize that we are aware of many of the actions that we need to take, but still have to have an appreciation for the process and meaningful engagement with all of you to help craft the climate action plan. And so it won't take longer than 2 years. It'll maybe take about a year for us to gather the resources, make sure that we have the feedback necessary, get your input on a prioritization framework in order to be relevant. We know that some of our first goals are in 2030. Our net zero goals are in 2050. I also would like to see this be relevant to PSEF's climate investment plan as well. There's a few other overarching relevant processes happening at the city that I think deserve some recognition and relevance as well. And so that's a bit of a preview of some of the thought processes that I currently have around the climate action planning process.
Thank you, Vivian. Could I ask a follow-up question?
Of course.
And thank you for noting my
optimism, so to speak. I fully recognize this. This will be a long process, as it should be, as we think through what does community engagement look like? What is the role of this commission? There's a lot of work to be done in just figuring out the how of developing the next climate action plan. So I just wanted to clarify, my question is recognizing that that will be an extended timeline. How can we as commission members in the nearer term leverage the existing important work and priorities that have been previously identified by the staff and uplift what might be considered priorities separate from the overarching and comprehensive climate action plan, but you know, as the city considers its budget, as we think about what are the opportunities within, you know, housing to support electrification or whatever it might be. Is there a role for the commission in identifying near-term actions as we work to develop the longer-term comprehensive plan?
Yeah, absolutely. For the record, Vivian Satterfield, CSO. I do see that as incumbent upon my role in my office and coordinating with all the staff to identify those key opportunities and to ensure that the commission is exercising both its advisory as well as its advocacy capabilities and power. Don't forget, this commission is an extremely powerful commission because you advise the executive, the mayor directly. You also advise the administration through me, the CSO, and the city administrator's office, and you advise the legislative arm, city council here as well. And so there will be plenty of opportunities that will make themselves known in which the commission can be exercising more of that advocacy, more of that advisory role as well.
Thank you.
Any other contributions from staff?
I believe Commissioner Dan had a question as well. Commissioner Dan. Okay, then we'll just move on. So again, for the record, I'm Co-Chair Isa. So we're now going to return to the briefing from the Bureau of Planning and Sustainability on the Multnomah County carbon emission energy trends. Next slide. So again, linked to this meeting event page will be the energy dashboard. So first, I'd like to give a thank you to climate policy analyst Kyle Diesner, who maintains the emissions inventory and energy dashboard for being back with us today. And again, I'll monitor any chat or raise Zoom hands for any questions.
Good evening, everyone. I thought it would be helpful to run through the takeaways from my presentation as well, just as a refresher. So I'm gonna just share my screen, Elaine. Yeah, don't worry about that. I'm gonna go right over you. Excuse me. Oh, there we go. Okay. So I'm gonna, oops, that didn't work correctly. Okay. So just a quick recap. I covered three things in my presentation: our community-wide emission inventory, our consumption-based emission inventory, and our pathways analysis. We also have a city operations inventory that I manage. We're not talking about kind of city operations in this briefing, but we will be back in front of you later to dig into those more issues that are more specific to our government operations. So I'm just going to quickly run through these top takeaways. So emissions declined 26% as of 2023. Remember, our inventories run 2 years behind that standard cities, states, national governments. There was a 3% drop from 2022 to 23, and that was primarily the result of higher electric grid emission factors, changes in weather, and significant increases in biofuel usage offsetting fossil fuels. We also talked a little bit about the new transportation methodology at a very high level. I can certainly go into more detail on that tonight, but wanted to share that we are looking at a new approach that provides more granularity into the transportation subsectors. I have very limited data on that because it is unfortunately pretty complicated to be able to bring into our inventory fully. In terms of the consumption-based inventory, 65% of our consumption-based emissions are not in the sector-based inventory. A refresher on those two. So a sector-based inventory or a production-based inventory looks at emissions that are produced within a geographic boundary. There are exceptions to that because we include electricity and waste, which obviously are generated. Well, you turn on your light switch in the boundary, but the emissions actually occur outside the boundary. So that is one kind of distinction there. Consumption-based emissions are actually life cycle emissions. So they look at the emissions that are produced around the world to satisfy that consumption. So it's a very different approach. I like to kind of think about it as the sector-based inventory is carbon accounting. You're literally accounting for all of that energy consumption and the emissions that are produced, adding up the kilowatt hours and the gallons of fuel. Whereas the consumption-based inventory is modeled. So it's modeled based on household, government, and business spending using data on final demand. So our consumption-based inventory is much bigger. It includes a lot more that isn't occurring within our jurisdiction, but is the result of consumer demand. So what Portlanders are purchasing and that global impact. So important to understand kind of the difference between those two types of inventories. So in terms of this consumption-based inventory, it is modeled. We don't do it annually like our sector-based inventory, only every few years. And that's because, you know, it's modeled data. So it just isn't as accurate in its nature. So the consumption-based emissions as of 2021, our most recent, were 20.4 million. The sector-based, 7 million. And we have seen our consumption-based emissions continue to increase year over year as our sector-based emissions have declined. So this is a dynamic that is seen across cities, particularly in the United States, to a certain degree in Europe as well, but in the Western part of the world. And it has to do with our consumption patterns. And it has to do with the globalization of manufacturing and the production of products, which have moved, you know, in 1990, we had much more of that was occurring within our boundary. And so much of that has been exported out. And that's happening locally, but it's also happening across the state. So Oregon has found the same trend statewide. And then the other note here is just that production emissions from the production. So that's the making my soda can, making my laptop, making this carpet, my clothes, whatever it may be. The actually making those things is 66% of our consumption-based emissions. And we don't tend to think about that in our traditional sector-based inventory because it isn't life cycle. So we're not getting those emissions from the making of things. Some things we do have an industrial sector here, but I would say the vast majority of what any of us buys is coming from elsewhere. So really thinking about the differences between these inventories and how our strategies to reduce those emissions look different is, you know, I actually think really fascinating and something we can go a lot deeper in the months ahead. And then I just want to touch on pathways as well, just as a reminder. So this is our model that looks at how we get to our adopted climate goals. So it's a scenario visualizer. So it pulls data out of other underlying models and kind of brings them all together into a single view so that you can see the track that we need to be on to reduce our emissions to hit the 2030 50% reduction goal and the net zero target for 2050. And what we just updated that analysis. So what I shared with you on the 18th was brand new. You guys were the first people to see it outside of actually me, because I didn't even show it to these guys first. So yeah, you're very lucky on that note. It is online now. It's posted, including with the technical memo, and I'll give you guys a link to that so you can access it on your own. But what we found with the updated analysis was if adopted policies stay on track and the utilities do achieve 80% renewable electricity by 2030, Portland can reach our 2030 targets. Now, to be clear, that means that we continue the work that we're doing, reducing emissions from buildings, reducing emissions from transportation, reducing emissions from industry. So that's not like we stop today, the utilities hit 80% and we're good. We have to stay the course. But if the utilities can hit that 80% target, which is still quite questionable, we will reach the 2030 goals. If the city acts aggressively now, so we do as much as we can between now and 2030, cumulative carbon emissions could be 15 million tons lower than if we delay action. Say, wait till 2030 to really get going on climate planning, or I should say our climate action. And this was pretty surprising to see because climate change in, does not care about the emissions that we produce in a single year. That's how we kind of break it down in order to think about it, understand the problem and tackle it. But obviously that doesn't really matter. What matters is cumulative emissions. So the fact that we are able to demonstrate that we can reduce emissions by 15 million tons through early action, I think is a really strong incentive for us to do so. So with that, I'm just gonna pause and see what questions folks have. I have additional materials can share. I have additional slides, so happy to take this any direction that kind of works for this group. I hope you see me as a resource. I'm here to support you guys in the work that you're doing. So let me know where you have questions and where you kind of want to dig in more. And even if we can't cover it today, we can kind of map out how we can go deeper on some of these topics in the months ahead. So I'll pause there and see if folks have any questions.
Commissioner Vivek.
Hi, Commissioner Vivek, District 2, he, him. I'm curious, Kyle, are you able to, in the pathways model, are you able to, between the two kind of sector-based and consumer-based inventories, are you able to disaggregate component parts within the model to be able to say if Commissioner Jose's suggestion of more public transit is going to be possible, so scenario analysis, so if that's going to happen as opposed to EVs or as opposed to other negotiations with the state and kind of coming up with building codes that would vary. Are you able to disaggregate that and look at the potential kind of wedge effects that has in terms of marginal differences?
Exactly. Yeah, I will clarify. The pathways model just looks at the sector-based emissions. So does not include consumption-based emissions. So it's only the emissions produced in boundary. But yes, it forecasts out those emissions through 2050 through a baseline business as usual scenario. And then you can apply strategies and watch that wedge graphic change depending on how you prioritize different things. And if folks are interested, I'm happy to do a demo to show you how it works. I'm prepared to do that. But up to you guys if that would be valuable for you. Good to know. Is that you would like a demo?
Just to follow up quick, I think it'd be helpful for the commissioners to actually come up with things, to not take your time, to come up with potential things that the commission sees as plausible scenarios, and then have you back and go through that or meet with you separately or whatever, rather than necessarily doing it now. Because
we can certainly do that as well. My thought and kind of the intent behind this tool and the reason we have it online is so that it is publicly available. And anyone, all of you can download the tool and play around with it. And so that's where I thought maybe giving you a quick demo of it would enable you to do that. And that might further additional questions that you guys have. But absolutely happy to come back and do that at a different time too. Can we do that? Oh, are there? Well, let's go through questions first. And then if we have time, we'll do the demo. And if not, we can do it a different time.
Commissioner Stephanie.
Commissioner.
actually know what's going on there.
That didn't happen the last time I spoke.
I'm not sure.
It can't be pointed up.
Well, it's turned off now, right?
I don't think so.
Oh. Can you hear me? Am I on the mic?
I think you are, yeah.
That was kind of a wild experience.
It's still. Oh, wait.
It's not fixed.
I'm very interested in consumer-based commissions. And I wanted to just first clarify the 2030 goals. Are they based entirely on sector-based emissions? That's what I thought. So it seems like the big new ground and the place to be looking ahead for us especially, and all of you, is consumer-based ones. So I'm curious if you even have a beginning sense of, is this educationally based or regulatory? How do you even begin when there's so many reasons people buy things and there's so much ignorance, et cetera?
Yeah.
Without getting trapped in virtue signaling, you'll be a good whatever, et cetera.
Yeah, great question. So I will note that consumption-based emissions, I mean, you hit the nail on the head that they are new, they're emergent. Portland was the first city to do a consumption-based inventory in the world in our 2015 Climate Action Plan. And so we've worked with C40 and other organizations a lot on how this has kind of spread out across the world. And now cities around the world have consumption-based inventories. And C40 as an organization that does set standards for member city climate action plans is really looking to see cities dig into that work. And so they've set a requirement that at least 2 categories of consumption have to be in your climate action plan. So food or construction, for example. And they're also encouraging us to set targets for those. Now, some cities have gone, like the city of San Francisco. There are not many that have set targets, but the city of San Francisco has for reducing their consumption emissions across the board. I do think that's a conversation that we should certainly have. I think there's a lot of value in doing that, but we have not set any goals around consumption-based emissions yet, partly because it is quite challenging given the nature of those emissions. And historically remained unclear what level of reduction we could anticipate. There's been a lot more work done on that since then, though. So I think we have answers to some of those questions that we didn't when we did the climate emergency work plan a few years ago. And I've got this deck up, it's showing you. Just to show you this one slide here, Oregon commissioned a study. So the Stockholm Environmental Institute, SEI, is the entity that built our consumption-based inventory model. And it's the same model that the state uses for the statewide consumption-based emissions. And so the state contracted with SEI to do a technical report that really, to Vivek's question earlier, really broke down what are the drivers of those emissions and where the state has opportunities. And I think there's a lot of lessons learned in that report for us. So for example, this is, they were actually able to do a wedge analysis to show, and of course it's too small for you to read the details. I apologize for that. But the point is here that, at the bottom of the purple section there shows how far we could reduce those consumption-based emissions in Oregon by taking these strategies that are available today. And so I don't know if you can read some of those, but a lot of the stuff that we do already know, right? Our clean truck rules, our CAFE standards, the work that we're doing to reduce emissions in buildings and in transportation also help reduce consumption-based emissions. Our work that we're doing here in Portland around residential infill and getting people into smaller housing units, that's a huge way to reduce consumption-based emissions. So we do have, to your question, we do have regulatory levers where we can reduce emissions through policies of the city of Portland, like using our zoning code and where do we allow development to occur? How large can those units be? We also can reduce consumption-based emissions as we're getting people out of their cars, right? If people don't need to own cars, that's another way to reduce emissions. And so there's so many opportunities, and it's really all the levers that are available to us. So to your point, you know, certainly some things like reducing consumption of meat is something that we probably have fewer regulatory options. And that is something that's probably more like education and public engagement. But there are also things that we can regulate and have historically. For example, our low carbon concrete policy for city construction projects is a procurement policy, but that regulates the concrete that we're using on city projects. So there's lots of opportunities there with across our building sector that, you know, and we've looked at deconstruction, our deconstruction policy. How do we expand that? How could we set embodied carbon standards for new construction buildings? So there's a ton of opportunity using our regulatory authority. One thing that we did in, I just want to note our sustainable consumption and production work plan. So this was a report we produced in 2021. So it's a little dated now. The work plan items in here are past. So really, I'm hoping that the next climate action plan is a place where we carry this work forward. But I do encourage you to take a look at this plan because it really builds the case for why we care about consumption-based emissions and digs into those questions you were asking, Commissioner Stephanie, about you know, what kind of levers are available to the city to address those emissions. And one way that we started to look at that, sorry to skip ahead, is in this case, like we identified that to increase the use of low carbon and reuse electronics. So think of the work that Free Geek does, right? If we don't have to buy a new computer, but I can get a refurbished computer from Free Geek, that reduces consumption-based emissions. So what kind of tools do we have as a local government? So we actually looked at this from using this kind of matrix where we looked at demand side interventions and we looked at supply side interventions. So a demand side intervention would be working with a household to change maybe their behavior or their practice. Supply side intervention might be working with telecommunications companies or retailers to try to work on the supply side. And this isn't too different from what we do with other sectors like appliances or lighting, for example. So these are things that we have experience with. But we use this kind of matrix to also look at what we called overshoot and shortfall consumers. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at the follow-up questions. I took the liberty of adding a follow-up question to that list. I did not get permission from our CSO, but I went ahead and added one anyways, because I wanted you to have this additional information, which is how consumption-based emissions are really driven by household income. And I think that makes sense to folks when you think about it, right? And so we decided to break out our opportunities here by looking at overshoot consumers. So there's higher income households and businesses that do have the capital and the ability to make those investments and are driving the bulk of the consumption. So how might we address them through supply or demand side interventions? And then we looked at what we called shortfall consumers. And this comes from Kate Rayworth's work on donut economics, where you have certain folks in our society that aren't consuming enough. They actually need to consume more than they can today. So that complicates this operation here, but I think it creates tremendous opportunities around equity and opportunities for job creation, job growth, creating you know, more resilience in low income communities. So I think there's a lot in that that aligns with other priorities here at the city. And you know, all of this is in the sustainable consumption strategy, so I'm not going to go through how the whole matrix plays out here, but did want you to just kind of see an example of kind of how we've dug into that and the way that we've thought about that previously.
Commissioner Dana.
Commissioner Dana, District 4. Thank you so much. You actually answered a lot of my question because I was curious just looking at, because this is sector based and you're talking about consumption based, where the overlap falls with some of the different actions. I see it happening in the embodied carbon around food waste, and then there's one around, excuse me, embodied carbon in construction. And so, and just the point being that, sorry, any emissions that happen, whether it's here, reduction, or in a place of manufacturing, say China, it's great for addressing climate regardless. And that's where consumption-based emissions is so important because we need to reduce it everywhere.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, with that being 60% is upstream in the production cycle, I know that the low carbon concrete addresses public when the city does construction projects. Could that be expanded, you know, to all construction projects across the city? I'm trying to think of just where there's kind of where we can push the envelope that hasn't been yet, and where there's maybe new strategies that don't show up in this current, that you kind of mentioned a few. I know that the state has that report that I know David Alloway's research is based on, I think. Was it his? Yeah.
Yeah.
So where do you see some of the frontiers that haven't been addressed? And I'm also thinking about procurement with the city. It's a huge thing with supply chain emissions, being able to look at scope 1 and 2 emissions for contractors potentially, and being, you know, weeding out those that don't meet certain criteria. I know I'm getting into the weeds, but if you kind of mentioned a few areas, but what frontiers do you feel like we should be exploring and kind of could be aggressive with, and taking the city's role a little bit bigger and maybe in a regulatory or policy perspective?
Yeah. I'm going to take the beginning of your comment first, just to note, you know, here, this chart does show that overlap between the two. So that dark blue section there is the emissions that are in both the sector-based and the consumption-based. And what emissions are those? Those are the emissions that we produce in county that are from consumption. So for example, we spend money on energy in our homes. We spend money on buying fuel for our vehicles. We have waste that we throw away. So those activities that are occurring within Portland that have to do with consuming things are getting counted in both. So that's a way to kind of look at that. And you can see that here on this chart. And I've got too many things open, so I can't actually see it. But so the use phase is that like turquoise color. Those are generally, well, in all cases here, are emissions produced in our boundary. So for vehicles and parts, you can see the bulk of the emissions from vehicles are actually using that vehicle, which means we need to get people out of their cars. We need to have more efficient cars. We need to be transitioning to electric vehicles. You know, if we reduced all those use phase emissions because every vehicle was electric and we had 100% renewable grid, that production portion there stands out. It starts to become more important. But from where we are today, we really can make a significant difference in terms of addressing our sector-based emissions. I also want to note, you know, I think we've done a lot of work around buildings and construction in terms of housing unit size and residential infill, and all the work that our planning team has done, accessory dwelling units, really changing the laws in Portland to shift away from these single family home neighborhoods to create more density is a big piece here that we've done. We've also done a lot around, you know, embodied carbon in materials, salvage and reuse. And we've done a lot around food waste. But most of these other categories we're not really working on so far. For instance, food and beverages is an area that we have not taken on. I think there's a lot in services and healthcare where, you know, we're not having those conversations with the big hospitals and the big service providers in Portland about reducing the embodied carbon of their operations. And there are opportunities there. So that's an area to explore. So there's a lot of things in here that we haven't had really the direction or the bandwidth really to dig into. And I think that's one of the great values of a climate planning process, and especially having a group of leaders like you. You can ask these questions and, you know, point us where we need to prioritize work. So that's, I think, a huge opportunity in front of us. I think there's still a lot of opportunity around construction. I know at BPS, we have talked a lot, especially Lauren Zimmerman, who's leading our embodied carbon work, about embodied carbon standards for new construction buildings. You know, for existing buildings, that is the low embodied carbon solution, is how do we preserve those existing buildings? Examples that are currently underway, there's an effort at the city, office to residential conversions, a lot of work on preservation, but we're not talking about new construction and in terms of embodied carbon. So I do see that as probably like the biggest opportunity. There are some legal questions about our ability to regulate that because, you know, it overlaps a bit with the building code, obviously. I think that there's a pathway there because the building code is silent on embodied carbon. So I think that's a way through that. And this is something that I'm hoping will be.
Sorry, I just wanted to, I think that embodied carbon in new construction is an example of that nexus of housing, economic development, and climate. And it is a really good example of where the challenge is, because the mandate right now is to build as quick and cheap and fast as possible. And embodied carbon and some of the regulatory tools to get at that present sort of a new way of doing business and a perception that it's going to slow things down and make it more expensive. So Lauren and I and Kyle, we talk about this all the time. We have not been able to find a way in really into that larger statewide conversation around all the housing development because we're getting pitted against each other. It's like that's viewed as a luxury when you have to just build a whole bunch of housing. You know, they don't want to hear about. It's like kind of dead on arrival. So it's just an example of what we were talking about before. Not that we should stop trying, but it's like one of those uphill things. I know we're running out of time.
Commissioner Suze.
Commissioner Suze, she heard District 4. This dashboard is great. I was playing around with it a little bit just now. But I wanted to ask real quick, you know, we have all seen electricity demands soaring across the country due to new data centers being built. That is just one of the most drastic concerns is in terms of resource use that we're looking at. So I know this data is from like 2023. We haven't quite hit that point where we are now. So first, I wanted to ask how much of data center energy usage is a concern in Multnomah County as far as like the stats that we're looking at? And then do we expect, you know, with utilities trying to transition to renewables, it looks like they're at about 35% right now, according to this data. If they're trying to get to 80% by 2030, you know, maybe we don't have authority to regulate utilities, but as they're, you know, should we be looking at how we have more regulations around data centers and energy usage? I don't know, just wanted to hear your perspective on that.
It is absolutely a huge concern. You know, I don't think it's something you're seeing significantly in the inventories, at least at 2023 and even, you know, for 2024, 25. I don't know that that's going to be showing up too much within Multnomah County itself. But we are hearing more about new projects for new data centers in the county. So I do expect that that's going to become a problem in the near future. We have a bigger issue with that, though, is that there's no way to break that energy use out from the other energy use from other buildings. And so unless data centers get their own rate class, their own tariff, where they kind of stand apart, right now, we don't have a way to do that. But it's something that we're kind of aware of and worried about. And I do think, you know, having a policy at the city of Portland about, you know, how we handle data centers and I think would be really valuable. It's quite emergent.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Commissioner Jessica?
Yeah, hi, Jessica Zahn, she, her, District 1. I'm curious, and this could maybe be a follow-up after the fact question, but I feel like there's a lot of talk about like levers and, policy or, things that regulatory kind of environment. When we are talking about, and I was thinking about what Commissioner Sue said earlier about like the messaging and like how people react to it. Do you have any like lessons learned that we could draw from where maybe something didn't work out well, where we tried to roll something out as a city and just the people did not feel well about that? Like, how can we, I know I've got some neighbors who feel very strongly about the gas powered leaf blower situation. So, just, kind of curious, like how do we not over regulate people, right? But still do what is right in the best interest, right, of the greater good, of which obviously a net zero goal is for the greater good.
I think that is one of the biggest challenges ahead of us. I might have a different opinion than some of my colleagues on this, but when I look at the data and the amount of energy that we have to reduce, to me, it's about systems and changing those systems. We can't get to our goals household by household. Having those conversations, getting people to change their behavior. We need to change the system so it's easier for people to make low carbon decisions, right? Why isn't the default the cheapest car you can buy is the EV, right? No, it's the most expensive car. So I do think that's a big piece of this. And I'm hearing some chatter over here. Do you want me to?
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
It's fine.
I think these are.
We can chat more about this because I'm very interested in this.
I think it's actually a great note to end on. It's about changing the system, not to alleviate us all from the individual actions we should be taking and encouraging others to take, but it truly is about the systems, and that's the challenge we have ahead of us. Thank you to Pam, Kyle, Andrea, and I'll go ahead and pass it off to our co-chairs.
So again, this Co-Chair Isa. So again, thank you to everyone who provided the briefings, answered our questions, and helped with this discussion. And so for now, we're going to be coming to the end of our meeting. Next slide. So commissioners, please remember to fill out the meeting feedback form that was linked at the last weekly high five email. And we go through this feedback and make decision changes based on what you guys tell us. Next slide. So for some next steps and reminders, our next regular meeting will be on February 19th. And the retreat again will be on Monday, February 23rd from 5 to 8 p.m. in person and required for all commissioners. And remember not to forget to reset your passwords every 90 days. And thank you for attending tonight's meeting.